Sounds of South Summit Brasil. Realização Instituto Caldeira. Jornal do Comércio. Radioativa produtora.
Estamos iniciando mais um podcast Sounds of South Summit Brasil. A gente está recebendo agora a Nancy Wang, fundadora e CEO da Advancing Women in Tech. Ela vai falar no evento hoje. Welcome, Nancy.
Thanks so much for having me, Mauro.
Okay, so let's start. If you could tell us a little bit about your project.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm incredibly honored and grateful for the U.S. State Department for having me on this trip because, part of my objectives here is to spread the word and increase awareness of the mission of advancing women in tech. So Advancing Women in Tech is a federally recognized 501c3 nonprofit organization that has the mission of elevating more women who are in the middle of their careers. So they might have been working, 5-10 years, they're a senior individual contributor, and they want to make that leap into management and in the future into executive roles. And so how do we help them get there? Because if you look at it from a macroeconomic perspective, women becoming leaders, managers, or executives or senior leaders in their organizations is a big gap today that we are experiencing in the tech industry. And so our main outreach is delivering high-quality courses on a platform called Coursera.org. If you are curious, check us out at Coursera.org/AWIT, where we have over 100 hours of course content covering product management, how do you build products on the cloud for real-world cloud product management, and then finally, for engineers who are looking to become engineering leaders or managers of software engineers, how do you become an engineering manager, real-world engineering management.
Mm-hmm. So people from Brazil, women from Brazil, they can have access to this course too?
Absolutely, yes. So Coursera is a global platform. And in fact, when we did our data analysis, we actually discovered that 30% of our students were not based out of North America, based on where they're logging in their IP address. In fact, a large portion of that outside of U.S. Student learner population is actually coming from countries like Brazil, like Chile, and Peru, where our content has been localized to Spanish and Portuguese.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about your talk at South Summit, what's the main message you are bringing to our community?
Yeah, so as a woman in deep tech, and so I've worked in data infrastructure, big data analytics, as well as cybersecurity for the past decade plus. It's my, I would say, passion and also obligation to bring that message to global audiences. And so one, that is, women, we need more women in deep tech areas. And then two is, how does that benefit economic prosperity as well as innovation across different organizations if we have more women in the workforce as leaders? And then finally is, as an engineer, I like to be hands-on, be actionable. So part of that comes into, well, if we see the gap, right, and why solving that gap is so important, now what do we do about that gap? Right. So I'll also end my keynote with a call to action for male allies as well as women on how to get more women into deep tech fields.
Mm-hmm. What have you heard and what do you know about women in tech here in Brazil?
Yeah, so yesterday I was part of a roundtable that was hosted by Technopuck, where we had distinguished women from academia, professors, also who were, for example, deans or administrators. We also had one woman who was head of IASP based out of Spain. And I think I see a lot of just energy as well as excitement about bringing more women into leadership roles. In fact, just seeing the women's stories of how they're, managing family life as well as leading major initiatives as part of the Science and Technology Park, as well as major STEM initiatives in their universities, gives me a lot of optimism that, we are also seeing sort of this status quo and the gap changing in Brazil as we are in other countries.
Mm-hmm. I have two questions here from Instituto Caldeira. They asked me to ask you. One of them, because you talk about technology, innovation, they want to know, what do you think is the main ingredient for innovation?
Yeah, so main ingredient, if I might cheat on that question a little bit, I'll give you two. And so I think the first ingredient for innovation is inclusivity. So if you think about SaaS products, right, which is really, really blown up, right, over the last 10 years, SaaS products, you and I consume SaaS products. People around the world, right, consume now products on their mobile phones, on their laptops, right? The cost of laptops and digital equipment has gone so, I would say, low, right? If you look at Moore's law, that most everyone in the world has some sort of mobile or laptop device, right? Which means that the medium of delivery for apps or SaaS apps has just exploded worldwide. Which also means that as you are now building products for an increasingly global audience that looks more and more diverse across many different countries, across many different languages, you also need people building those products who are also diverse, right? Who have empathy with their global audiences. And that's why having a more inclusive workforce, whether it's men, women, people speaking different languages, coming from different parts of the world, that leads to more inclusive products and frankly now a better bottom line, right? You don't need to take my word from it. McKinsey produces tons of studies that talk about how teams with more inclusive workforces are able to achieve up to 50% more, I would say, bottom line or gross margin than teams who are not, right? And so I think the second ingredient is also that access to education or upskilling. In North America and around the world, there's a concept of continuing education, right? And so that thought of you always need to be up to date with the latest skills because, as we've seen, right, if you go before 2006, the cloud didn't even exist, right? Really the age of cloud. And of course now, NVIDIA just had GDC conference in San Francisco talking about GPUs, about, learning, right? Training your own foundation models. That has really become the forefront in the last, I would say, year or two, right? So the rapid pace of technological innovation means that all of us who are in tech and surrounding areas need to keep up with our own skills base so that we are up to date and we are relevant with all the technological advances that are happening at a much more rapid pace.
Okay. And I have a daughter who is 4 years old. So I'd like to hear from you. How can we, family, parents, show girls that they are fit for tech?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate, I would say, from my personal background that I grew up with a sister. So my father had me and my sister. And for him, it was girls can do everything that a boy can, right? And so the gender, at least in my upbringing, was not a factor. And so if you think about, and I thought this was normal, and I think this is I'm very fortunate to have that as part of my upbringing, where fixing cars, right, fixing tractors, taking apart bicycles and putting them back together was just very normal, right? If people ask me, what did you do over the summer? Well, I took apart a bike and put it back together. Cool, right? And so I think that's part of the normalization that I think needs to happen is not so much, I can't do STEM or I can't love math because I'm a girl. Everybody can, right? Whether you're a girl, a boy, non-binary these days, right? Everyone has a shot at a career in STEM if they so choose.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and enjoy South Summit.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me, Mauro.
Thank you.
Sounds of South Summit Brasil. Realização Instituto Caldeira. Jornal do Comércio. Radioativa Produtora.